This is the Build Wealth Canada podcast, episode number 44.
Welcome to the Build Wealth Canada podcast, where it's all about becoming debt-free, accelerating your wealth, and taking control of your money. Now, here's your host, Cornell Schreiber.
Hey, it's Cornell and welcome to the Build Wealth Canada show. We hadn't had an entrepreneurship or small business type episode for a while, so I thought it would be great to have the CEO of CanSpace on the show to share some of the best practices on running your own site and top mistakes to avoid, whether you're running your own site as an online business, as a blog, or even as a place to showcase your portfolio to recruiters and companies that you may want to work for. Now, I definitely consider having your own business on the side one of the core pillars of personal finance. When we were first starting off, I used a small online business as a tool to get us financially independent and pay off our mortgage quicker because we could use the profits from that business to help pay for our vacations and discretionary spending so that my income from the day-to-day job could go towards investing or paying down the mortgage. So this is definitely a subject near and dear to my heart. And with this episode, I hope that it'll help you prevent some of the mistakes that I personally made when first getting started. Now, before we get started, a quick word from this episode's sponsor. Are you a Canadian business owner or entrepreneur? If so, today's sponsor has something special for you. CanSpace.ca, Canada's favorite web hosting provider, is offering all listeners $10 off their web hosting services. Now, why should you care? Well, in 2018, we all know that your business's success depends on having a website that is reliable and loads as fast as possible. CanSpace has been trusted for over 10 years by Canada's largest corporations for providing affordable, reliable web hosting with the fastest load times in the industry. Having a website that is down frequently or just loading slowly can cost you business and, more importantly, damage the reputation of your brand. Choosing a reputable web hosting provider like CanSpace can help avoid these issues. Plus, CanSpace offers award-winning support, bills in Canadian dollars, and has very generous 30-day money-back guarantee. And if you have a website already, they'll help you set up and transfer everything for free when you sign up for annual hosting, which is pretty awesome. So, if you're itching to get started or are just thinking of one day having your own blog or business, then secure your free coupon now while it's still available by going to buildwealthcanada.ca/Canada. It's buildwealthcanada.ca/Canada and then enter your email address. And now let's get into the show. All right, Sunil, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So Sunil, one of the things that kept me from creating an online business for years was that I thought I needed to know how to actually code to have a site. So for those not familiar with WordPress, can you speak to what prior skills or knowledge are actually required to have your own site, whether it's for your own business, a blog, or maybe even just a place where you can post your personal portfolio and build your own brand for companies that are hiring?
Right. I think these days very little coding knowledge or technical skills required at all because, especially when it comes to WordPress, because it's such a popular platform, there's literally thousands of tutorials available online, and YouTube videos and things like that. So even a complete beginner has a ton of resources to help them get started from scratch. And again, because it's such a popular platform, there's themes available for every imaginable type of business or personal project, whether your site's about food or technology or real estate or even just selling doorbells, let's say. You'll likely find a pre-existing theme that suits your niche exactly. So there's not a lot of creating from scratch, but that has to happen. All of our accounts at CanSpace also come with a free script installer that allows you to install WordPress with just a few clicks. And so there's really no barrier at all to getting started.
Also, yeah, I mean, I know I personally use WordPress, and when my friend who owns his own web development company told me about it, it was like a godsend because I was struggling so much with trying to learn how to code myself and just getting really, really irritated. So I'm just really glad that technology has advanced where you no longer have to be an actual coder just to have a site up there. So no, that's great. And then the other thing too is I see a lot of advertisements from companies trying to sell sort of this all-in-one solution where you're basically just using their site to host, but also to build your site instead of using your own hosting provider like you guys and something like WordPress. Now, those services, they look really easy to use and kind of almost too good to be true. They have all these kind of celebrities endorsing it too and all that. Yet every successful blogger that I know doesn't use that and are instead using WordPress. So, why is that? And can you speak to the pros and cons of going with these types of solutions?
Yeah, for sure. There are a lot of these proprietary sort of all-in-one platforms out there, and in many cases, it is actually fairly easy to get going with one of these solutions. But the issue with going with any proprietary solution is that it leaves you more or less at the mercy of your hosting provider and that platform. And so what that means is it makes it virtually impossible to switch hosting providers. And if they're lacking any functionality, like if you want to take payments down the road, and they don't offer that feature, then you're completely out of luck, and you have to rebuild your site from scratch in a platform that does support that. WordPress, on the other hand, is completely open source and provider agnostic, meaning that if you build your site in WordPress, you always have complete control over your site, including the content itself and the back end. And you're always free to move that to another provider at any point in time. It's also a very extensible platform, meaning there's lots of plugins available to add virtually any functionality you can think of: forums, online payments, image galleries. And in most cases, it's as simple as downloading a plugin to add that feature. At CanSpace, we actually have dozens of clients that come to us every single day who are unsatisfied with their existing hosting provider for whatever reason. And because they're using WordPress, we can have their entire sites transferred over to us within just a few minutes. That incurs no downtime at all.
Yeah, so if somebody has an existing site, how involved are you guys in helping them transition their site from their hosting provider to you guys? Do you guys assist with that in any way?
Yeah, so I would say in about 95% of cases, we handle the entire process. They just give us their login details, and we download their entire WordPress site or whatever site they're using, including the content, databases, emails, things like that, and we migrate that to our server. So in most cases, we handle the entire process, and there's no user intervention required at all. And there's also no downtime during the process.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I mean, for people that aren't programmers like myself, I mean, that sounds like a gigantic undertaking, even if you're not happy with your hosting provider. Like, let's say your site's constantly down, things like that. I know I had that issue with a previous hosting provider. And then if you want to switch, it's kind of, it seems like this daunting task because you want to make sure you switch over properly and you're worried about downtime. And then you're worried that you don't copy over something properly. And then the whole site stops working. And it's just, it was just this really anxiety provoking thing for me.
For sure, yeah. I think people think it's a lot more of a difficult process than it is. And in the past, that actually has been the case. Whereas these days, because things are so standard with cPanel and WordPress and things like that, it's actually a very straightforward process. And there's really nothing involved these days in migrating a site from another host.
Yeah, and I can't stress enough how important the whole piece is with WordPress. How, first of all, it is free. There's this whole community that's constantly building these plugins and themes and all these different things to have every kind of functionality you'd want. And I remember many, many years ago when I was just getting started too, I was evaluating some of these all-in-one services. And I mean, that was the deal breaker for me is I thought, well, what if this company, goes bankrupt? Or what if it gets bought out, right? And the company that buys it.
Yeah, then you're kind of stuck.
Yeah, you're kind of stuck, right? And you're limited to the functionality that their developers choose to prioritize and create, as opposed to this giant kind of community. And I was always worried too, like, what if, I have this price I get from them that I feel is acceptable, and then 1 year they just jack up the price, or they say, hey, if you want to keep going, you have to pay us more, and then you're kind of stuck, right? Like, you don't want to go and rebuild your whole site from scratch, right? So you're kind of, they can kind of almost like hold you hostage if they wanted to. So, I'm really glad you mentioned that. Yeah. And then what are the costs in creating a website for your business, blog, or personal portfolio?
Sure. So as you mentioned yourself, WordPress itself is completely free. And as I mentioned already, there's kind of thousands of free templates and tutorials available online and plugins and things like that. So if you're building the site yourself from scratch, the actual development costs can be very close to zero. There are, of course, paid and premium templates and plugins that may interest you, but those typically don't cost more than about $20 or so. And you can always hire someone online to do things like build logos for you, and images and things like that can even be done for less than $20 as well. So the cost for the content itself is very, very low. In terms of actual hosting, the costs can vary. But my recommendation is that choosing a host based entirely on which one is the cheapest is probably a bad idea. They're likely overselling and offering poor support, or may even just vanish entirely without notice. Things like that are not uncommon in the hosting world. But a hosting plan at a reputable company like ourselves can cost as little as $5 a month.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I can definitely definitely want to emphasize that, going with the cheapest provider isn't necessarily that shouldn't be your main component that you focus on almost exclusively. I know I made that mistake before, where I kind of wanted the cheapest provider, and then when I had an issue with the site, you're basically kind of left to your own devices. They say, oh, sure, we'll help you, right? And then they basically just copy and paste like a templated email of potential things that you could do to fix it, which if you're not a programmer don't make any sense to you. And then you're sort of stuck, right? And now you have to go hire someone to try to fix it. So I personally ran through that issue, and I kind of learned the hard way that hosting is actually really important.
Costs have just come down so much. It's just not worth trying to save $1 or $2 a month, for a site that's only up half the time and loading much more slowly than it could be.
And that's the thing, it's not like, oh, your hosting costs $5 versus $100. There's such the range is so small, so you're literally just trying to kind of nickel and dime, trying to save a couple bucks, but you could be getting just horrendous support, like was the case for me. So that so for sure, I think that there's more to it than just kind of the bottom line price. So like I said, my site out not too long ago, it completely crashed. It stopped working. I needed this support. I was having trouble. Obviously I wish I that wouldn't have happened in the first place. What are the key requirements that we should look for when we're choosing a hosting provider for our site? Whether it's with you guys or someone else, what are sort of these really critical things that we should be looking for?
Right. I would say the reputation is probably the single most important factor. Like, think of a hosting provider that's been around for a while, has many positive reviews, and are just active in the hosting community in general. Make sure they offer 24/7 support, and that all the support is in-house and not outsourced overseas, like is becoming a common thing these days. I'd make sure they're making regular backups and that their servers are not oversold, meaning that they have way more sites on a server that is capable of handling efficiently. And in many cases, the only real way to test some of these things, for example, the performance of your site or the responsiveness of their support team, is to actually host your site with a company and give it a shot for real yourself. So that's why at CanSpace we offer a 30-day money-back guarantee on all of our hosting plans. So clients can sign up and give us a trial run, and if for whatever reason they're not satisfied with any aspect of our hosting, they can get a 100% refund of their payment.
That's awesome. And then you said earlier too that you guys help migrate the site. So if somebody wants to give it a shot, then if they're not happy with the hosting provider or they're just getting started, but especially if they have their own site, you guys can help kind of move it. You basically take care of moving it for the most part to your for you guys to host it. So it's not like they have the person switching has all this extra work to do now just to try out the new service, right?
Exactly. So in most cases, it's just a matter of signing up, giving us their login credentials, and we migrate the entire site for them and just send them like a note when we're finished, and that's about it.
Awesome. So when I launched my first site years ago, I had the misfortune of the site getting hacked, which basically made the site totally inaccessible, and it was a really stressful time, and I missed out on a whole bunch of sales, and I didn't know really about website security back then. So for anybody getting started, what are the top best practices that you recommend for making your website secure?
Yeah, very good question. Step one, I would say always make sure your software is up to date. So that means if you're using WordPress, make sure that all the plugins and themes are immediately updated to the latest versions. In many cases, these updates are made available explicitly to address security issues. Luckily, in this day and age, upgrading is very, very simple, and most plugins and themes can be set to update automatically via WordPress. So it does everything for you. And at CanSpace, we actually use a script installer that updates WordPress for you at regular intervals, usually nightly. And so that adds an extra layer of security. So you don't have to remember to update everything yourself. Your hosting provider themselves also play a major factor. For example, at CanSpace, in addition to traditional hardware firewalls, we also have application-level firewalls that explicitly prevent against WordPress attacks and attacks against other popular scripts. And what that means is even if your WordPress is not updated to the latest version, our firewall is aware of exploits that affect older versions of WordPress and will intercept them before they get to your site. And using techniques like this, we've actually managed to reduce WordPress hacking instances by over 95%. So luckily, things like this are becoming more of an issue of the past. Then there's obviously, obvious best practices like making sure you're using a strong password, change the default admin usernames, and of course, make sure your site is secured via SSL so that passwords are not being sent unencrypted over the internet. All of our hosting plans come with free SSL certificates to make sure this is not the case.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I remember when my site got hacked, I had to sort of look into how to fix it and all that, and it was a pretty tough thing to do. And sometimes some of these things that you're told to do to protect it, some of it's pretty technical, and not something everyone can necessarily do really easily if they have no coding background. Like there's some things that anyone can do, and some kind of get progressively more advanced. So I'm happy that you guys, you should. There's certain things you can do easily yourself, but sort of a lot of you guys also have that extra layer of security where you're also working on it on your end to make sure that it's secure, so that someone like me who's not a coder doesn't have to kind of learn all these sort of intricacies of website security, that kind of thing.
Yeah, having a hacked WordPress site is a nuisance for obviously the owner of that site itself, but also a nuisance for the hosting provider. So it kind of benefits both of us to make sure that WordPress sites and all of our client sites in general are just not being exploited.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because if your site gets hacked, the first thing the person does is like, "Oh, contact my hosting provider, help!"
Exactly.
Like a desperation, and now you've got this stressed out customer.
Yeah, it's always panicking.
Exactly. Yeah, I've been there, so yeah, I know what you mean. So now, if we're building a site that focuses on serving a Canadian audience, whether it's for our business, our blog, or a personal portfolio, what are the things we can do to get an edge and show up higher in the search results when Canadians are looking for our content?
Yeah, another good question. I would say step one would be to use a .ca domain. If you're targeting Canadian audiences, then polls have shown that Canadians kind of trust sites more. They're hosted on .ca domains more as they consider them familiar. And since we know that .ca domains are only available to Canadian citizens and corporations, visitors know they're dealing with a Canadian company. Step two would be to make sure that you're hosted on a server within Canadian borders. Google actually knows just based on GeoIP location that where your site is physically hosted. So having your site physically present in Canada helps with ranking on google.ca. And so for that reason, in CanSpace, all of our servers are always within Canadian borders. And finally, the way that you brand yourself is a big one as well. If you go to our site, for example, at canspace.ca, we mention everywhere you look that we're a proudly Canadian company, and we're not shy to show that off. And so don't be afraid to use the Maple Leaf everywhere / red on your site, or just some silly Canadian branding cliches.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, I know I definitely had this big dilemma when I started the podcast. I thought, oh, well, I really want to focus on, Canadian issues and then Canadian sort of, best practices and all that. But but then you're kind of worried because like, oh, well, the US is so much bigger. I'm going to be excluding that audience if I focus so much on Canadian. And so I had this big dilemma of, well, how niche do I want to go? Do I want to focus just specifically on Canada? And, one of the reasons I think the podcast has done so well is because I did ultimately decide to focus specifically on Canada. Because people, they're tired of hearing all this advice that it works great in one country, but maybe not in yours, and so it was interesting how kind of niching down actually helped, even though I thought it might kind of hurt me as well. So so I definitely hear
focusing on your niche is never a bad thing, and ranking more highly on google.ca doesn't mean that you rank lower on google.com. So it's kind of an issue of only a benefit, I would say. It doesn't really impact you negatively in any way.
Awesome. That's good to know. And then, of course, one of the ways to get kind of most mileage from your site and build your audience is to actively promote your site through different marketing initiatives. What has worked well for you guys, and what types of marketing have you found to be more difficult to get traction on?
Yeah, social media is huge these days, as I'm sure that you guys are also aware. Clients want to see you're active in the community and also in general. So posting frequently on Facebook and relevant discussions to let your clients know that you're kind of the authority in your field always helps. Podcast is obviously another big one these days to publicize yourself and your business. And again, if you're an authority in your field, as we are when it comes to web hosting, then just sharing that knowledge and offering value to the community at large always helps your brand and your business. Word of mouth is huge, and this is a more traditional method that people tend to forget about this day and age, this day and age in social media. But surprisingly, the majority of our clients come from personal recommendations. People want to start a company and don't know where to register their domain or find a hosting provider. And when they search, they get tons of results, and so they kind of just ask friends who they trust for recommendations. And again, this is where most of our new clients come from. So going over and above for your existing client base and asking them to spread the word if they're happy with your service tends to go a long way. Hosting and domains are kind of very competitive niches, and so we've actually struggled with initiatives like pay-per-click, like Google AdWords. In many cases, you end up paying hundreds of dollars to acquire clients that would take many years to recoup that cost. So we've yet to make that avenue work effectively. And the same thing for domains. At CanSpace, we have the lowest prices in the world for .ca domains, and because our prices are actually pretty much the same as our own cost, it just isn't feasible for us to spend a lot of money to acquire a client for a domain where we're making no profit. So so pay-per-click we haven't made work effectively, but luckily we have these other initiatives that have worked quite well for us.
So you found social media to work pretty well despite kind of all those different changes, like with Facebook now, how it's more difficult to sort of show up unless you're boosting the post, for example, things like that. You guys, and then you still found that to be pretty effective, or is that kind of becoming? Do you find less and less effective because now the social media platforms tend to want money for all these different things that used to not really cost you money?
Yeah, it's not even just advertising on social media, but just more so that you have a presence there. So when someone, again, is recommended, when someone has us recommended to them by a personal recommendation, they tend to just go on our social media page and see that we're active in the community, that we have good reviews and things like that. So it's more so just the presence will kind of like help boost your reputation in their eyes when they're already considering you.
Oh, okay, gotcha. No, that's a good point. Okay, no, that's great. So tell us a bit more about CanSpace and how are you guys different than all the other hosting providers out there?
Right. Well, we're focused almost exclusively on the Canadian market. This is our niche, and no one serves it better than we do, in my opinion. As mentioned, all of our servers are within Canadian borders. All of our staff is in Canada, and we bill only in Canadian dollars, meaning there's no surprise foreign exchange fees each month on your credit card statement. We host some of Canada's largest corporations, as well as many government entities here in Canada, and so we like to think that we're a trusted brand here in Canada. And our goal is to treat all of our clients equally. So we provide the same level of support to a major Canadian corporation that we would provide to someone just starting a small personal blog. We're extremely competitive on price. As mentioned, we have the lowest prices in the world on .ca domains. And we're consistently adding additional free features on our hosting plans as opposed to just increasing prices. And finally, we've been around for over a decade now, and we have the lowest churn rate in the industry. So we know what it takes to keep our clients happy.
That's great. And I know one thing that really kind of attracted me to you guys was that you actually do have kind of government clients, which I think speaks a lot to the security that you guys have. Because I used to kind of work in that area where we had a lot of government clients, kind of in a different industry. But I remember just the sort of the hoops you had to jump through and the really strict requirements that they had for anything security related, right? Because they have public information, they have information on individuals that's very private, that if got compromised, there would be hell to pay. So so the fact that that's one of the things I found really kind of attractive with you guys is that because you were able to get basically parts of government to host with you guys. I mean, that says quite a bit, in my opinion, about kind of the security and the lengths you guys go to make sure that all the data is secure, that you're not getting hacked and all of that.
Yeah, they do their research for sure.
Yeah. So that's great. So thanks so much for coming on the show and for giving us some tips as well. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks again.
Great.
All right, take care. Bye.
Ciao.
All right. I hope you enjoyed the show. One last reminder before we finish today's show, if you're a Canadian business owner and are looking for a reliable and affordable web hosting provider to host your website, you need to invest in local Canadian web hosting. And CanSpace is Canada's favorite provider. It's super fast and affordable web hosting, a 30-day money-back guarantee, and they'll even help migrate your site from your current provider for free. If you're about to launch a new venture or are considering switching providers, CanSpace can help. And they're offering $10 off all web hosting plans to Build Wealth Canada listeners. And even if you're just considering starting your own blog or business one day, I still suggest you go grab the free coupon while it's still available. This way you can use it whenever you're ready, and at least this way you're getting the free $10 off no matter what. So visit buildwealthcanada.ca/Canada. That's buildwealthcanada.ca/Canada and enter your email address to get the coupon for free while it's still available. All right, that's all for this week. Have a wonderful week and talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Build Wealth Canada podcast at www.buildwealthcanada.ca.